joining us today. I'm Monica Braithwaite, Ireland Marketing Manager at Morgan McKinley. We're delighted to welcome Alan Lyons to present today's Success Series webinar on the topic of high-performance teams. Alan is a registered business and sports psychologist who coaches leaders and teams to enable high performance, a keynote speaker and author. He is passionate about helping people to perform at their optimal level through leveraging emotional intelligence, clarifying purpose, disciplined execution, and enhancing mental toughness. Before we kick off shortly, I'd like to run through some housekeeping tips. We will be recording this webinar and it will be available next week on our YouTube channel by searching Morgan McKinley Recruitment, or please visit our website www.morganmckinley.com. You can join the webinar by connecting to the audio using your computer or laptop microphone and speakers, or select Use Telephone after joining the webinar. If you are experiencing any sound or technical issues, restarting the software may help. Questions will be taken via the chat feature on your webinar control panel. We will try to get to as many as possible during the course of this webinar. We hope you enjoy the webinar. We would be delighted to hear your feedback, so please join the conversation on Twitter at Morgan McKinley using hashtag Success Series and hashtag CareerAlan. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Alan so he can introduce himself in a bit further detail. Hi Alan, welcome to the webinar.
Great, many thanks Monica. That was a great introduction. What we're going to look at together today is inside high-performing teams. What could be useful for everybody at this stage, and it's a coaching question, would be to ask yourself the following. How would you know it was worthwhile attending this webinar? What would you like to get out of it? If this time within an hour you're actually saying that was worthwhile, how would you know? Okay. Now, I'm going to show you a model for inside high-performing teams. I'm also going to look at how come it's the most competitive, I suppose, advantage for today's organizations. All the mindsets and tools, etc., that we'll be going through will also be available in my book. So if anybody wants to have a look at it in more detail, it's called iChange. But before I go any further, we have identified in Kinch Lyons 5 chronic problems in teams today. If you're sitting beside somebody, if you're on your own, that's fine. Try and think of a problem that exists in your team. I'm going to show you the 5 now and see if any of them match what you were just thinking about or indeed talking about. First chronic problem is the mindset of teams. People are very much problem focused. This consists of a contagious mindset which seeks to reinforce what is not working. People are talking about what's broken. People are looking for the lack of resources, and indeed they're finding them. This is very much a mindset, and it's also a contagious one. And we're going to look at contagion within teams. The next one is low trust. There's a lot of backbiting, infighting, victimism, defensiveness, not sharing of information. Essentially, there is no relationship without any trust. For those of you that are familiar with the Great Places to Work survey, you will notice that that survey is actually based on how much trust exists within an organization, whether that's with your colleagues, your team, or your manager. So they're actually equating the level of greatness in a place to work with the levels of trust, which is interesting. But really, we'll look at trust in a little more detail shortly, but essentially, without trust, there is no relationship. The next one, number 3, listed there, is a lack of clarity of purpose. Again, there's a lot of ambiguity, hidden agendas, political games, and chaos. Leaders and organizations might be thinking they're withholding information not to worry people, but that's exactly what it's doing. It's creating anxiety. And teams which are working in such organizations with a lack of clarity of purpose find it hard to get motivated and engaged employees. Next one is people generally feel on teams that their potential is very much underutilized, which leads to apathy, moonlighting, daydreaming, boredom, escapism, anger, fear. And lastly, but the one that's considered the glue, poor execution systems. Teams very much are codependent, there's clear hypocrisy, and people are working on urgency over importance. And we're going to look at how to tackle each of these 5 chronic problems so we can increase the levels of engagement within your teams to drive them towards high performance. Let's look at levels of engagements, which is interesting. You'll see on the left side, we have a model there for when you're engaging in change and high performance, there's 3 levels, and you can only work essentially with customers. Customers are people who are up for the change, bought into the meaning, and generally are combating those 5 chronic problems we looked at. Browsers are your members when you're doing a team talent checkup who are unsure, maybe not bought into the purpose, maybe not feel meaningfully involved, maybe not understand what the most important thing to do is right now. But browsers can be changed to customers. Then we move on to complainants. The complainants on your team don't actually want change or they're not up for it. You can work as hard as you like with complainants, but if they do not want to change, it won't be possible for them to do so. You could bring in the best coach, the best psychologist in the world, but if they're working with somebody who is a complainant, they first need to make them a browser and then make them into a customer. What's really interesting, most people will often hire somebody or believe that, you know what, people will change. I can change that person. We can't actually change anybody else. And in fact, the more we try, it can have the reverse reaction. What we're much more likely to do is let that person feel meaningfully involved so they can do the change for themselves. It's a bit like when people get married, any of you out there in relationships, a lot of people set off on a journey and they say, one day I'll be able to change him or her. And they realize if that person is a complainant, they don't see the need for change, you only actually end up banging your head off a wall with very little return. And this is the same. So when we're looking at high performance in teams, we're looking at developing customers for change. We're going to look at a model to be able to do that shortly. Interesting question for yourself right now would be, where are the people on your team? What I mean by that is, how much of their talent, energy, and commitment are they volunteering? Essentially, how many customers do you have? Which is interesting because, as we said, you can only engage with customers. Right, before we look at the model, I would like you all to sit back and think of a high-performing team that you know. This could be anybody from the All Blacks rugby team to the Rolling Stones, musicians, whatever the high-performance team is, they all have plenty in common, and we're going to look at that. And we're going to look at this reiteration that the high-performing teams are the main competitive advantage in today's organizations. And we're going to take a positive psychology approach to this because it's the best way to unleash high performance. Now, just to stand back, what is positive psychology? Positive psychology is not merely just positive thinking or being happy all the time. Up until about the mid-80s, late 80s, all psychology was generally based around pathology, what was wrong, what was not working in people's lives. The thinking was, if we really understood what had an individual at their lowest level, if we really understood what made a team feel weak, lack meaning, you'd have the opposite. This was not necessarily the case. And then in about the late 80s, early 90s, psychology started very much looking around, well, what is it that creates the conditions that make people want to get up in the morning, make them feel strong and confident, give their lives more meaning and purpose, etc. Now, this positive psychology is very much the science, the rigorous science, which underpins all of those conditions necessary. And I'm going to show you a model which will allow us to use positive psychology to bring your teams to high performance. It's called the Team Turbine, and it's in front of you now. And you will see in this wind turbine, at the heart of it is what's called Be Solution Focused. And the reason that's at the heart of it is because if that's the one that we don't get right, the rest of it will fall apart. It's the foundation for everything. And we're going to look at that first, what exactly Be Solution Focused means. It then looks at the Future Perfect. The Future Perfect is very much the clarity of purpose. What would give your team more meaning? Are we shared? Do we feel meaningfully involved? Is there a common purpose? Next, we look at the highlights. And the highlights is leveraging of the strengths within the team. And lastly, narrow the focus. And narrow the focus is very much the glue. Do we as a team know what the most important thing to focus on right now? And do we hold each other accountable? All of this is creating positive emotion. And this is a necessity for teams to get the high performance. So without further ado, let's go through the Team Turbine and see how you may be able to use this to apply positive psychology to enable high performance in teams at your workplace. At the heart of it, I said, is to be solution focused. High performance teams very much have a specific way of viewing things, and we mirror that in high performance teams. If people are being solution focused with you, you tend to be solution focused with them. There is a thing in psychology called attribution theory. Now, attribution theory applies very much to high performance teams because essentially when something goes wrong in high performance teams, they tend to see it as less permanent, less severe, and less personal than more problem focused teams who are constantly looking at why the problem was there. They nearly embrace and put their arms around it and can be very much paralyzed by it. Rather than focusing on what they want instead of the problem, they go into a deep dive of trying to understand the problem in all of its intensity, which is less useful on the journey towards high performance. What is useful is to think of the idea of positive deviance. Positive deviance, which I'll show you a slide on now, is used by a lot of organizations around the world to apply positive psychology. Let me explain to you what it is. Basically, you'll see it in front of you. There's a normal distribution curve where the core of your team are probably. Now, there is always, however, top performers. There's always people with the right mindsets, exhibiting the right behaviors that you want to see. However, when you get coaches in, when you're thinking of your team, and when you're maybe going to ask me questions, everybody always wants to discuss the problem children, or indeed what's low, what's not working, etc. The people on the left of the normal distribution curve. However, we are less likely to get as much from them than we are from focusing on what the top performers are doing differently and how we can move the core pivotal talent up. The low then generally, who are the complainants, end up working themselves out, or they indeed have to up their game. Positive deviance, the idea behind it is wonderful, and it's a way to use positive psychology. Save the Children Foundation are one of the biggest charities in the world, and they use this approach exceedingly well. The Save the Children Foundation, if there's a war or a famine, etc., they go in to help the countries with the main goal of looking after the children. In 1991 in Vietnam, over 42% of the children were suffering from malnutrition. They asked Save the Children Foundation to come in to help. At the time, Jerry Sterling was in charge, and he went over and he met with the Vietnamese officials, and he asked them, is there any families living in the same dire circumstances, but indeed their children are not suffering from malnutrition? Now, they hadn't looked at this, they hadn't thought about it, and they went out and they found, very few obviously, but they did find some. And they found, and they went and they stayed with these families to see what they were doing differently. So the impact was their children were not suffering from malnutrition. And they discovered that they were feeding their children food which was generally considered adult food, shrimp, green potatoes, cotton paddy fields, etc. They were feeding their children more frequently, but with less food, etc. They were doing various differences. They were having a positive impact. And this is why it's called positive deviance, because these families were deviating from what the majority were doing, but it was having a positive impact. So they could then go and share focus groups with the rest of the communities to share what was working. Much more likely to be a sustainable solution because it was a solution that came from within. It's also much more useful than going over with the usual few £1,000,000 or euros, give it to the Vietnamese children to help them, and then within a few years, the malnutrition will be back because it's a plaster approach. So the positive deviance, it's very much around identifying what is working and amplifying it. And this is something that high performance teams are very good at doing. The more average teams, we get obsessed with what is not working and we fail to capitalize on what is. So the power of focus within teams in the positive psychology approach will be, if you focus on your problems, your team wisdom becomes about your problems. If you focus on what works, however, your team wisdom becomes about what works, which is interesting. And this is a mindset that is contagious. And you can tell if people are being solution focused on your team or problem focused by the language they're using. Are they focusing on what they can control? Are they using initiative on resources? Are they very much being reactive, blaming everything on external events, etc.? So when we look at being solution-focused teams very much know what works when working together. And what we mean by that is they have very much defined their own protocols for how they deal with conflict, how they deal with meetings, and how they deal with decision making. And what's interesting about this, it's not saying that we do not have conflict. In fact, it may even seem like there's more conflict, but it's considered productive conflict because the trust is high enough on the team that they can engage with each other in an assertive manner. I often work with teams, and when I arrive in, it can seem like quite an intense, aggressive environment. But I soon realized that actually it's high performance, and the fact that they're all challenging each other is a good sign. It means that the trust is there. They're not challenging each other to get over their own agenda or to score points or to fire an arrow. They're challenging each other because they care about the results and they really want to know. I can walk into a more pleasant environment, what seems more pleasant. Everybody's having a cup of tea and it's a lovely team. However, the real conversations start the minute we leave the door. And actually, what seemed like a good team was actually nowhere near high performance because they don't even look at engaging with productive conflict. It's something they shy away from. High performance teams also very much have critiqued what works for them in meetings. They value their time together and they have protocols which they come up with themselves around what is acceptable and not acceptable, and they hold each other accountable to these. The same with decision making. They look at ways to make consensus decision making rather than it just being something that's lofty or opinion polar, or rather than it just being the loudest voice in the room making all decisions. So when we're being solution focused, the key takeaway here is that high performance teams very much focus on what they want and how to amplify that, and have protocols around conflict, meetings, and decision making. Okay, the next blade, well, the first blade we move on to is the future perfect. And the future perfect is very much around having a clarity of purpose, and everybody being meaningfully involved in the direction of the team. Interesting, when you're coaching people and you often ask them what they would like out of it, most people don't say what they want if they're being problem focused. They actually list what they do not want, which is interesting because you say, how would you know this session was worthwhile? And they say what they don't want to take from it rather than what they do. It was a bit like the coaching question I asked you at the very beginning when I said, ask yourself how you would notice that this was worthwhile. Which is interesting, it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. There's a thing in psychology called pre-session change, where it came from a psychologist called Milton Erickson, where even when somebody rings up to see a psychologist and the time they spend on the phone discussing what they'd like to be better from the sessions, a lot of the time when they come in to actually see us, their problems have actually been resolved or are on the way to being so. Why? Because cognitively, they've actually started to think about what they want. People are also, our CEOs or some team leaders can often say to me very quickly that, our people are just resistant to change. Well, actually, people generally are not resistant to change. They just happen not to respond very well to forced change. But if they can be meaningfully involved in the future perfect, in the purpose and the meaning of the team, they'll actually champion the change. The old resistance came up from Freud, and you might remember Freud, the psychoanalyst. He used to say if people were late for his sessions, they were potentially resistant. If people didn't like solutions he came up with for them in his sessions, he'd say they're in denial. A lot of that thinking now is probably just Freud getting a little bit frustrated with the people he was seeing and trying to shoehorn them into a box. So I would say, and especially in positive psychology, we would say resistance is not a useful concept. They just happen people not to respond well to forced change. If you feel that people on your team are resistant, I would actually look towards myself as to why that is. Future perfect as well. A lot of work has been done on this over the years. This is about what gives you meaning. Most people, if you ask them what would give them more meaning and engagement in work, they'll answer money. But actually money, as long as you're paid fairly, more money does actually not give you more meaning and engagement. This goes back to, if you remember Maslow, the first motivational theory, at the top in Maslow's theory was self-actualization. What gives me meaning and purpose? Dan Pink, the psychologist, outlined some great research into this, which noted that the three things that motivate knowledge age workers more than money is mastery, the ability to feel like when you go to work, you're getting better at something, autonomy, to feel like you have the space to work on something without Big Brother watching you, and lastly, purpose. And it's back to that purpose and meaning. People, if they can be involved in some purpose and meaning, that will actually take a lot of the pain and sting out of missing a promotion or not being paid fairly. A lot of this has been rehashed recently over the years in Harvard Business Review since the global economic crisis in 2008, where the strong leaders who could tap into people's lives and give them a sense of meaning and purpose. A lot of it is rehashed from this great man, Man's Search for Meaning. You might know him. He is Viktor Frankl, a Jewish psychiatrist who was in Auschwitz during the Second World War. Now, he wrote a captivating book on his release, so naturally it has a happy ending for him at least. But he noticed that his friends, family members who were being experimented on, malnutrition, etc., the ones that would die quicker were the ones that had lost any sense of meaning or hope. Their lives had no purpose. They faded away a lot quicker. Now, obviously, a lot of it was out of their control, etc. It was easy to lose hope in a death camp. But Viktor Frankl himself focused his meaning and purpose on being able to visualize himself lecturing to his psychology students about the horrors of the death camp, etc., and how meaning and purpose can drive you through. Now, luckily, Viktor Frankl got to do this and wrote a captivating book about the experience called Man's Search for Meaning. Again, it's very much back to the purpose, the future perfect, what Maslow was saying in self-actualization, etc. So on teams, what does this look like? Well, if you're a team leader, what's interesting is the two biggest mistakes that are quite often made is one is what the idea of the lone genius, where the leader goes off and comes back and tells everybody how it is. Nobody's bought into it, and then they find that 6 months down the line, they have what appears is what is people on the team being resistant. More likely they're never bought into it. Or else the other mistake team leaders can make is the opinion polar, whereby they take everybody's idea on board and nothing is really, it becomes mediocrity. Nothing is really grounded. People lose confidence in that leader. So what should you do as a team leader to have a common purpose? First thing necessarily to do is to very much crystallize your own personal understanding and thinking of what it is that your team is and how your clarity of purpose links into the overall organizational mission and strategy, etc. And then once you've done that, it's very much get the team involved, meaningful team involvement and critique, so they can also be part of the shaping of that team purpose, that common purpose, rather than it just being handed down to them. Now, what's interesting to point out is during the change over the last few years, where in organizations we've had to do things where during the good times you would have not liked to have done, but there's been two common mistakes made. First one is the leaders who come out and give an overly blue skies picture of what's ahead. And then a couple of months down the line, when people are let go, people have lost trust in that leader. It's the Pollyanna effect. Or the other one is the leader who doesn't say anything, or the management team who doesn't tell people anything. Now, their motivation is they do not want to create fear or anxiety in their teams, etc. But that's exactly what they are doing, because people know there's change about. So what should you do? Well, you need to present the brutal facts and talk straight. If I was coming into a room to let people, but I knew some of those people would be gone in a couple of months, I would come in and I would say, okay, here is where we're at. Not all of us in this room are going to be here in 2 months. This is what I'm trying to do about it. And we all get involved in that. That actually will make people be more bought into the meaning and purpose. And if you have to let people go, the people who survive won't be what we call, they won't have survivor's guilt, or they won't be, I suppose, bitter towards the company for what they've done because they understood it from the beginning. A classic example of this played out a couple of years ago was on a US Airways plane. Captain Sully was accredited with, well, I don't know, it was a crash landing his plane into the Hudson River. But what really surprised everybody, or what I suppose in behavioral science, was that if you look, and this was an iconic picture from the front of the New York Times, most passengers remained very calm and relaxed. In fact, a lot of them standing on the wing of the plane looked like they were actually waiting for a bus to arrive to pick them up. A lot of this was put down, the fact that they were able to remain calm in quite an adverse situation was put down to Captain Sully's captaincy, his leadership. When they were about to crash, he didn't do the classic mistake where tell them nothing and there's panic, or he didn't tell them everything was going to be okay. He told them we're going in for a serious crash landing and here's what you need to do. People then were able to relax, knowing that, well, I shouldn't say relax, but they were able to be more confident in their captain and leader because of that. So it's that clarity of purpose and getting people meaningfully involved in it in any team. Often when people come back to me and they say, this person or that person is a bad egg on the team, they do not feel meaningfully involved, let alone understand the purpose of the team. And this is the power of purpose. The power of purpose very much creates the why behind the what. And that's creating an emotional link to the critical job that has to be done. People buy people and they will buy into that. Back to Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, if you can get people meaningfully involved in your team's purpose, you are way more likely to have much more longevity in the high performance track. A little funny here, but it's quite true. Really, I'm fine. It was just a fleeting sense of purpose. I'm sure it will pass. Okay, so when we're looking at clarity of purpose, future perfect, we very much need to have a very clear shared team purpose with everybody involved in it. Everybody's very clear in high-performing teams of their roles, responsibilities, and very much feel that they can have team feedback and involvement. That is an essential thing for high performance to happen. All of this, by the way, is creating positive emotion. Again, necessary for us to have high performance. There's a lot of work being done on positive emotion of late. A psychologist called Barbara Fredrickson identified the positivity ratio, which showed that to be able to flourish and function at your optimal, you need to have at least 3 positives to every negative. This whole model, this team turbine, is increasing the positivity ratio of teams as you go. And people are much more likely to function at their optimal level if they're feeling confident and their positive emotion ratio is higher. Interestingly, high-performing teams are even proven to release the hormone oxytocin, which mums release to their babies to instantly create trust when they're born. Impact of trust cannot be understated, and this positive emotion is creating it. Let me show you an interesting thing about positive emotion. Okay, emotions respond just like the muscles. Like muscles, the ones you stimulate the most become the strongest, the most agreeable. This is something we continually work at rather than it being a tick box exercise. The impact of trust. You will see at the top there, if we have high trust, we also have high speed and low cost. And that's what high performing teams are experiencing. However, if there's low trust, it speeds everything. The speed of everything is a lot slower and the cost of everything is higher. I often think a perfect example of this is in September, after September 11th. If you remember, before September 11th, you could be just about on time for your flight and you'd be okay. Post September 11th, when the trust was low, and rightly so, the speed, even if you were on time for your flight at the airport, by the time you did a striptease going through security, you were likely to miss your flight. So that was a perfect example of where trust is low, speed is slower, and obviously the cost of security is up. You might be thinking, hold on, but that's a good thing. Absolutely. But we're just showing that in high performance teams with low trust, that same impact is happening. People are experiencing low speed, high cost. People often say to me, I got feedback that I'm not trusted. I think there can't be any worse feedback than that. They go off then and they do some personal development training on communicating or some good training, but really it's all wasted because even if they come back and do great presentations and learn a few tricks about connecting with people, if people don't trust you, they'll be reading into why you did that. You can get a high trust individual on a team who buffoons their way through a communication with you, but because you trust them, you're not analyzing them, you're not questioning their motives, so the speed is higher and obviously the cost goes down. So high performance teams very much benefit from high trust cultures. Now, in fairness, there is a nature-nurture debate to this, which is, are high-performance teams trusting because they're getting results, or do the results create the trust? There's a lot of debate on that, but they're obviously both impacting it. People often talk and said about the quick fix for trust. So what quick fix will it take to restore your complete trust in me? Well, obviously, if it was that easy, we'd be okay. But there is specific behaviors and there is specific ways high-performing teams create trust in terms of talking straight, accountability, practicing the solution turbine. But as is often said, trust arrives on foot and very much leaves on horseback. So it is essential to create positive emotion and to benefit from the impact of high trust to create high performance teams. So the takeaway from why are we creating positive emotion? Well, we can then operate at the speed of trust. And all of this, by the way, to happen, it's necessary that everybody on the team has a voice and everybody feels that they can communicate what it is they're trying to make a difference with. What is their contribution statement? And most teams don't do this. Most people don't do this. They keep the contribution they're trying to make in life, on the team or whatever, as a hidden little secret, kind of believing that one day the real you will come around the corner like a religious conversion and you have the real life that you always wanted. Sharing your goals, sharing the contribution, sharing the difference you're trying to make always allows for much more traction to get there. Peter Drucker, the father of management theory, who coined the phrase knowledge age workers, has a great quote where he says, whenever anyone goes to his team or employer or peers and says, this is the contribution I plan to make, the answer is always, why didn't you tell me earlier? So this is what high performance teams are doing. They're very aware of each other's what each other's contribution towards the future perfect that they're trying to make is, and they communicate that regularly as it changes also. Okay, so where are we? We've looked at the heart of the turbine for high performance, and that's the mindset, identifying what is working and amplifying it. We looked at the future perfect, which is very much around creating a shared purpose for the team. Now we leverage off what are called the highlights, and the highlights are very much around the strengths within the team. What's interesting about high performance teams is they're very aware of each other's strengths. Now, not just their competencies. Competencies are things people are good at. Strengths are things that people very much enjoy working on and normally, therefore, very good at. Now, competency can be a strength, but it's not necessarily the case. So not only do most people not even work out what their strengths are, they just have some idea of them. But when you ask them, I say to somebody in a coaching session, how do you know that's a strength for you? They'll often say, well, a teacher told me, a manager or a coach told me. But they haven't actually stood back and said, actually, is it a strength? Does it make me feel strong and confident? Does it make me feel authentic? Do I enjoy doing it? Quite often somebody will come to me mid-career and say, I'm not that happy, but it's not my job because I get to play to my strengths every day. But when you tear it back a bit, what they really meant to say was they're playing to their competencies every day, but they've never really assessed whether there is a strength. Nobody can really identify a strength for you apart from yourself, because nobody knows what it really or how it really makes you feel. And as I said, high-performing teams know each other's strengths. They know what it is that give each other flow moments. A more average or low-performing team are very keenly aware of what it is that each other is not bringing to the table. What are each other's weaknesses? And in fact, lower-performing teams start from the premise of saying, here's a new project. Okay, Monica, what's your attention to detail? Alan, what's your time management? And we're all acutely aware and looking out for each other's weaknesses. High-performance teams do this completely in reverse. The other thing that is often said, and it's not that useful, is that there is no I in team. Well, actually there is. And trying to pretend there isn't is not that useful. It's trying to shoehorn people into being, lemmings or just a copy of each other. And if we're all copies, well, then some of us are not actually necessary. What is actually interesting is that if trust is high in a team, if there's positive emotion and a high positivity ratio, diversity is a strength and it's something that we should look for and utilize. However, if that trust is low, diversity or difference is something that people try to stamp out. So rather than saying there is no I in a team, there is an I in a team. There's you, there's me, there's each of us on a team. We all feel strong and confident for different reasons, but being aware of that, That is the secret sauce of high-performance teams. Being aware of what it is, the people around you, that makes them feel strong and confident. Jack Welch, love him or hate him, he said, in manufacturing, we try to stamp out variance with people. However, variance is everything. With people, it has to be. With machines, cause and effect, we don't need to know, what makes them feel strong and confident. We don't need to know if they feel meaningfully involved. We don't need to know if they have protocols for meetings, etc. But with people, it is the essence of high performance. So Gallup surveyed a lot of people, 1.7 million employees in 101 companies from 63 countries, and they asked this question: at work, do you have the opportunity to do what you do best every day? Interestingly, only 20% of employees surveyed globally feel that their strengths are in play every day. And if you think about it, most people can't even identify what their strengths are, or if they do identify them, it's normally because somebody told them that they're their strengths. So they're not even likely to be their real strengths. We cannot have high performance unless everybody feels that they're meaningfully involved and in the flow playing to their strengths. So that's what the highlights takeaway is on this turbine. We leverage team member strengths. How? Well, we have the right players in the right place. Jim Collins uses the metaphor of getting the right people on the bus in the right seats. A lot of conflict happens when you simply have the wrong people doing the wrong things. Essential also is that we know each other's strengths, not just what each other doesn't like, or not what actually annoys us about each other, but actually what it is that other people do very well. Okay, the last blade on this turbine is narrow the focus. Now, what's interesting about this blade is this blade is very much what we call the glue. This holds the high performance together. John Kotter, the leadership thought leader, said most change initiatives don't work. Most high performing teams fall apart. And he's correct. People can be solution focused, they can have their protocols, they can have future perfect, they can be meaningfully involved, they can trust each other, they can identify each other's strengths. However, if they fail to narrow the focus, it will all fall apart, even though they're well-intentioned, because the whirlwind of what you have to get done every day at work is so intoxicating that if we don't narrow the focus, we all get off kilter. Or, as we say here, never confuse movement with action. Interesting research by Gallup recently also, which stated that most people have no idea what they do every day, how it's contributing to the overall goal of the organization. Which is interesting because if we're talking about people being focused on their highest priorities, if they actually don't even know, if I work a little bit harder or a little bit less, how that actually impacts, well, it's very difficult to keep motivated. And that's for anybody. And that's not because we're slacking off intentionally, it's just human nature. But if we keep score, the minute we start to keep score, the game changes. People play differently when they're keeping score. If two of us are playing a game of tennis and we're having a knock around, it will be good fun. The minute that scoreboard goes up, the game completely changes. And that's what this narrative focus is about. It's about great teams creating a rhythm of accountability and engagement around their most important goals. What's interesting about this isn't about team leaders holding everybody accountable to achieving goals and coming in cracking the whip. That will not enable high performance. Real teams are high performing whether the leader is there or not. Real teams, high performing teams, hold each other accountable, give each other real-time permission to critique each other on what we're trying to do in terms of mindsets, behaviors, and goals. And that's the difference. We're holding each other accountable rather than waiting to be held accountable. Interesting as well with high performance teams, they check in and they check in regularly, but not for long. And here's how they do it. You come in, you report, account on your commitments, you review a scale board, learn from what's working, and then you commit to steps, what contribution you're going to plan to make in implementing of next steps. Interesting about keeping a scoreboard, a compelling scoreboard, people are much more engaged. People are engaged around what's working on the scoreboard. A lot of this is borrowed from the success of Weight Watchers. Now, a lot of high-performing teams, especially if they're full of males, don't like to hear this. But what works in Weight Watchers is people are coming together. There's no secret sauce or magic. They're coming together to report and accounting commitments. They're reviewing literally on the scale how they're getting on, and they're holding each other accountable, telling each other stories, and then they're planning for what they're going to achieve next week. The exact same thing that high performance teams are seeking to do. And the Weight Watchers model is so successful because of that. But it's very useful when we look at narrowing the focus, holding each other accountable, etc. Larry Bossidy wrote a book called Execution, the Discipline of Getting Things Done. Larry Bossidy was the second in command to Jack Welch for years in GE. And he had this to say about narrowing the focus. Follow through is the cornerstone of execution. And every leader who's good at execution follows through religiously. Following through ensures that people are doing things they committed to do. And this is what you will find about most successful people. It's not that they're doing more. It's not that they're actually even better at most things, but they follow through. They're conscientious, they're consistent, they're focused. They take a laser-like focus to the most important stuff. They don't get caught up just working in the busy stuff, because anybody can roll out of bed in the morning and be busy in work. But are you busy on the stuff that will make the most impact? Have we all agreed on what the most important goals and activities are? And are we all holding each other accountable around them? That's the high performance. That's the glue. And this is the idea that we can critique and change as we need to. And that's why the high performing teams, the turbine, it's constantly moving. It's a continuum. The takeaway from narrowing the focus, we're creating a rhythm of accountability around what we've agreed are the most important goals as a team towards our future perfect. High performance teams, they're committed to the team winning over themselves. Yes, there is individuals, and yes, there is an I in team, and we're leveraging each other's strengths, but they care more about what the team does rather than being siloed, or rather than not being impacted if the team isn't winning, but their other teams, the direct reports, are having good results. They have a strong commitment to team winning over self. There's a scoreboard. It's constantly keeping score so we know where we're at. Just like we said in the football, the minute the scoreboard goes up, that's where you get engagement. If there's no scoreboard, watching and knocking around is not as useful. And there's a periodic review, constant check-in to see what's working and to be able to hold each other accountable. That's narrowing the focus. Okay, so just to show you underneath all these, we obviously have a survey which would assess a lot of the high performance dimensions used in positive psychology. There's 50 items in the survey. 5 main dimensions of team performance are looked at, which we just addressed together, and each dimension is comprised of 5 elements. Now, there'll be a bit of snow blindness when looking at this, but I just thought I'd throw it up anyway so you get a sense of it. So when we measure for high performance, we measure around the solution focused within what's listed underneath there, from meetings, decision-making, conflict, be solution focused, effective listening. We're measuring though from the team as a unit and the individual, so you can see the difference in high performance. So when we start with a team, rather than it being an off-the-shelf approach or this is the cycle you must follow, etc., which is all very old school and not that useful, we actually start with where the team is at. Most training, however, and team coaching, it's only impactful if it's a process. A lot of people will go away and do a 3-day training course, which could be very useful, lots of good content, good ideas, good contacts. However, the minute you come back to the day job, the whirlwind, it's very difficult to implement everything. And in fact, a few months down the line, you might see that brilliant leadership program you were on in a folder on your shelf, and it actually becomes more irritating to you because you know you connected with it, you know you needed it, but you never did anything with it. We have a solution to that. A lot of work has gone in positive psychology to creating a process and a track to make sure that high-performing teams are embedded in organizations. Just bringing through it quickly, we obviously have a team lead session to see what they believe the strategic imperatives and what the team needs to get right. We then work with the whole team, looking at high-performance team dimensions and measurements. We do the survey, the Team Turbine 1. We look at everybody on the team and we interview them about themselves, the other team members. Everybody then gets an individual work session or a report back on that. So you know what the contribution everybody's trying to make. You know the contribution that the team as a unit is trying to make. And you also know how everybody feels your contribution. Developing candor, getting trust increased, etc. This isn't about breaking people down to build them back up again. It's all about high performance and positive psychology. Then we bring everybody back together for regular teamwork sessions, periodic reviews. We also do the survey again within 6 months so you can see the shift in performance. Okay, so you can find out more about that on our website, kinchlions.ie. But what essentially you're doing with your teams is you're creating a team contract towards high performance, and that's the journey we're on. Okay, so I don't have the model in front of me, but there's the book and you can see a turbine there. So at the heart of it, we're talking about being solution focused. Has the team got the right mindset with each other? Is it identifying what's working so they can do more of it? Do we have protocols around meetings, conflict, decision making? We then look at the future perfect. Are the teams bought in to the meaning? Are we leveraging off the highlights which are strengths? And lastly, the glue. Are we holding each other accountable? What's most important? You can see how it works in reverse, which teams who are being problem focused, very much, they have no protocols of what works well together, but they do, and they talk often in corridors about what's not working. They don't feel meaningfully involved in the team. Actually, they're pushing against it, and they don't feel that it's something that's wanted or that they've been involved in. There's no highlights. In fact, there's lowlights. Everybody's keenly and acutely aware of the weakness. And when we talk about narrowing the focus, there's a widening of the focus. People take a machine gun approach, and they just hope to God that what they're working on will be most impactful. Nobody's holding each other accountable in terms of the team, apart from a team leader maybe giving you an appraisal, etc. All of that dampens, creates negative emotion, and far less likely to have high performance for knowledge age workers. So that is the presentation complete. I'm now going to ask Monica if you might have got any questions during the last 45 minutes.
So we've got lots of questions in over the course of the presentation. While we may not get to them all, we'll address a couple of them now and we can follow up on the rest after in the blog on our website.
Great.
So we actually had a question in yesterday via email, Jovita from Singapore. She was asking how she can deal with very toxic, negative staff members and minimize this impact to junior staff on her team.
Okay, well done getting it in yesterday. And so it's obviously something that's on your mind. And I would even say that I'd be interested if you found anything from the last 50 minutes or so that you might think of applying. But straight away, I would go back to the Jim Collins thing. So we have to look at the team talent checkup. Have you got customers, browsers, or complainants on your team? Have you got the right people on the bus in the right seats? Often I find there's not really bad eggs or toxic people, but you do find that there's people not bought into the purpose or that feel involved or indeed want to be there. So I'd be more focusing on what's working and how can you move the pivotal talent to aim towards that. People then that are toxic generally find a move and they love a conversation where they could actually get themselves on board or indeed out. Because that's generally what people are, once they're being toxic, clearly they're not happy, they're not bought into the meaning, they don't want to be there. So for high performance teams, we can't have individuals that feel like that. So could you practice the model and have conversations around that might help them, and I suppose a win-win depending on where they're at. Thanks, Monica.
Great stuff. And now over to the chat feature. We've had loads of questions in. I'm just going to go with this one. Mary in London asks, can you really play to your strengths at work every day?
That's a good question. And lots of people say that they get annoyed. They go, people talk about playing to your strengths at work. But I will say that the first step to start is actually figuring out what your strengths are. What are your flow moments? What gives you a feeling of being confident and enjoying yourself? Most people actually don't. They sit back from that. They actually don't spend the time to work on what it is that makes them feel strong and confident. Once you have that down, you can get it into a form of a contribution statement, going back to the Peter Drucker metaphor, and actually sharing that. And the more likely you share it, the more likely opportunities will come up where you get into situations or roles and organizations where you can indeed play to your strengths. Often managers or peers or people you can influence might even be aware of the contribution you're trying to make, definitely not aware of what you consider your strengths. But the more time you take out to do that and practice using the turbine, it will allow you to play to your strengths most of the time and make it much more likely that it happens. So while I wouldn't say that we can all go to work and 100% play to our strengths all day, we can phenomenally increase our chances to make it so by practicing some of the concepts we looked at today together. Thanks, Monica.
Great. And Josh in Sydney asks, where should you start when applying this model?
Yeah, well, see, that's a good question, Josh. And this is, I was kind of mentioning this earlier. Most off-the-shelf team models will very much say you're here, you're there. You know, it's like the cycle of teams, which may be accurate or may just be complete chance that you happen to be at the right stage. It would be much more useful to actually to start where the team is at, and we do that by obviously the survey, so we can see what's the most important and critical to the team. On the team coaching survey, you're also actually identifying what you believe are most critical for the team now, so where all the team feels is most critical. And back to the lady with the toxic person, the team coaching process is the best way to get your team to high performance. Not necessarily just training about models or even looking at this webinar, but actually getting in and doing team coaching around it. And starting, a good question, Josh, but starting where the team is at rather than where you think it's at is way more useful.
Sandra, I think we have time for one more, do we?
Okay, Monica, yeah, great.
So Paul in Cork asks, there are 20 people on my team. How many people are too many?
Yeah, no, that often comes up because I would say, Paul, now we might do a deep dive on it, but I would say that that's not a team. It's more than likely to be a group of people. Now, you might call it a team, but often when you get over the 13, 14 mark, it's less likely for start to have high performance and less likely to have sustained high performance, that's for sure. But it's more likely that that's a group of people. Now, where you could start is, are there interdependencies and responsibilities that make us necessary for us to be a team? Do they need to be a team? Ask them, do they feel like a team? Maybe it's working, but it's more likely what you have there is actually a group of people, which could be fine. But if you're talking about high performance teams, it's unlikely to exist within 20 plus people. Other things with the high performance is that to maintain it, it's much more likely for teams that come together for shorter periods and execute on some future perfect rather than 20 people who've been together for the last 10 years, etc. And again, that's why the turbine is used as the model, because it's not a case of I was solution focused, I was future perfect, I leveraged highlights, I did narrative focus. You continuously are doing it. You're always critiquing how we're working, critiquing the purpose, contributions, goals, etc. Thanks, Monica.
Great. Okay, so we'll leave it there. So thanks for all that, Alan. That was some really interesting stuff there. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you today. To view any of our upcoming events, jobs, career advice and blogs, please visit our website, www.morganmckinley.com, and follow us on Twitter @MorganMcKinley using #SuccessSeries and Career Ally. We'll be posting the full webinar recording on our website early next week, so stay tuned for that. Any questions or feedback, you can email us events@morganmckinley.com, or alternatively, if you have any additional questions for Alan. Thanks for your feedback so far, and enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks, everyone.